behalf of DACO Neon Equipment, I'd like to welcome you to our Neon Essentials training video. For the past 20 years, DACO Neon Equipment has been a leading manufacturer of neon equipment. DACO offers a full line of top quality equipment and supplies to neon shops throughout the world. We're confident that this video will help you better understand glass bending and processing, as well as the equipment involved in this exciting field. This video will be divided into 4 parts. In the first part, we'll discuss the tube bender's tools and equipment. Part 2 will cover the basic steps involved in bending the glass. Part 3 will show you how to make a neon sign from start to finish and cover topics such as glass selections, patterns and layout, bending to a pattern, and the welding of electrodes. Part 4 will cover the processing and bombarding of our new neon unit. At the end of our video, I'll tell you where to look for additional information on many of the topics we've covered. So having said that, let's adjourn to the lab and start bending some glass. Welcome back. We're coming to you from the lab at DACO Neon, where we have all of our equipment set up. In front of me, I've got just a few of the items that you'll be using on a daily basis. These are what I would like to refer to as personal items. I'm going to show you each of these, and then we'll kind of demonstrate throughout this video how each particular item will be utilized. One of the first things I want to show you, we'll start back here at the back of my screen. I've got, if you want to zoom in on some of this stuff, I've got a non-asbestos block. We use this non-asbestos block to lay our hot glass over the top when we have made a rise turn or a drop turn or changed elevations in the bending of the glass. These terms that I'm using will become more familiar to you throughout the video. Some of the other items that we've got here that you'll need on a daily basis would be just a plain old Bic lighter, because you'll be turning your torches on and off all day long. A good sharp glass file, and I emphasize the word sharp. It's nothing more difficult to cut glass with a dull file, and oftentimes you stand a great chance of ruining the work that you've already done. These files, I'll show you how we bend glass and how we cut glass in the next section, but keep in mind you want to keep a good sharp glass file on hand. Some of the other things that we have are corks. We've got several different sizes. We've got 10 millimeter, which is kind of hard to see, but it's pretty small. Then we've got a 12 millimeter cork and a 15 millimeter cork. The majority of the glass that we use in our shop here, and just about any shop, is going to either be 10 millimeter, 12 millimeter, or 15 millimeter. I've got a piece of 12 millimeter clear here, and we use these corks to plug up one end of the glass to keep air from moving all the way through it. On the other end, another item I want to display to you is the cone. So on the other end of our glass, we'll put a cone, which comes in the same size as the corks. You can get your 12, 10, or your 15. And with that cone, you'll want to hook up a swivel to it. The swivel is real nice. It moves 360 degrees from both ends, so you can swivel it around. And the reason we have that swivel is so that we don't get our cord or our blow hose all tangled up. You can see I've got my blow hose here around my neck, and I can turn that 360 degrees around that way, or I can turn 360 degrees around this way without tangling up my cord. I would take the cone and slide it on the other end of my glass, and that way when I blow in my blow hose to blow out a bend, it's going to keep the glass a nice consistent diameter all the way around, and it doesn't stress the glass. Aside from the cone, from there we're going to go look at a blow hose. What I have here is just a piece of neoprene hose. It's 3/16 in diameter inside. I slide my swivel onto one end, and on the other end I have a mouthpiece. It's a simple plastic piece that you'll be using every day, so you can see why it's important to have your own personal gear. You don't want someone else sticking their mouthpiece in their mouth. From there, we've got just a few more items that I want to show you. We've got our marking utensils to mark our glass, to show us where we want to heat up the section of glass and where we want to make our bend. If I'm using a colored glass, I'm going to use a darker pencil. The marks seem to show up a little bit better than do the white marks that I would leave on clear glass. For that, I would use a piece of soapstone. Once you get into the fire, it's important that your marks stay in place so you don't lose your direction. Next to that, I have what we call a glass gauge. This is a real handy little tool for determining the diameter of the glass. As you can see right here, I don't know if you can pick it up on the camera or not, but this, I slide my glass into that wedge, and that tells me the diameter of my glass, which is really nice. If you're doing a repair, you have to match something to an existing piece of neon. From there, I've got just a few more items, and we'll move on. I've got electrode holders. These electrode holders come in various sizes. In front of me, I have a 10 millimeter, a 12 millimeter, and a 15 millimeter. These correspond with the size of glass you're using and the size of electrode you're using. They're real handy because you can stick your electrode in there, slide the ring up around it, and that holds it into place so that when you go to weld your electrode onto your unit that you've just bent, you don't have to get so close with your fingers that you burn the ends of your knuckles off. Those are all real handy, and like I say, they come in 3 different sizes. A couple other items, map wheel. I use this to determine how much glass I have in my unit and how much glass I'll need to make a unit. I would just take this down and lay it on my pattern and run it around, tracing out my pattern. Then I'd read the dial on the front of it, and that would tell me exactly how much glass I need. It's also real handy when it comes to measuring units to fit it for a transformer after all is done, and we'll get into these things a little later. 2 more items that we have. I've got a bean bag. It's not real pretty, but it's extremely functional. This bean bag I use to place on units of glass that I need to stay on the table. If I'm doing a hand torch weld or something along that line, I've only got 2 hands. One's on the torch, the other's on the loose end. I need to keep my glass in place so it doesn't slide or move when I'm bending it. So these are real handy, and I'll show you how we use these a little later on as well. And then last but certainly not least, we're going to need a piece of screen. I'll take everything off of here. I have a 24-inch square piece of bronze screen. I use bronze screen because it doesn't give off any toxic fumes when you lay your hot glass down on it. It's very easy to see through. I lay that right on top of my pattern. Then I can lay my hot glass right on top of that, and I don't have to worry about it bending into my pattern or my table or catching anything on fire. I've put some tape around the edges because I've used this one quite a bit, but that just keeps it from fraying, and I can use it a little bit longer. But aside from that, those are some of your personal tools that you'll be using every day. One thing I want to mention is I also have a 4x8 table here in front of me. And I use a 4x8 because it gives me plenty of working space. So if I'm working on an 8-foot long tube of glass, or if I'm working on a 3-foot sculpture of some sort where the glass has to extend out, I've got a nice big open area to which I can work with all my bends and have my excess glass hang over without bumping into anything. So it's real important that we keep that in mind when we're bending or laying out our pattern, is how much room do we have to work. And it's very nice if you have a nice clean area like what I have here. Makes your job a lot easier. So now that we've taken a look at the personal tools, let's step around the other side of the table and take a look at some of the shop equipment we'll be using. Thus far we've talked about the personal equipment that we'll be using in the shop. I want to take a few moments now and show you some of the shop equipment, the torches and our air gas manifold system and supplies, and we'll take a brief moment, kind of go over that, then we'll step back behind the table and start bending some glass. I want to start right back here with our gas line. We've got a 1-inch gas line coming in from the city service with a on-off valve right here, which we can use to turn the gas either on or off. From there we run down the line into what we call our air gas manifold system. It is at this point where we take our blower, which is the BL42 from DACO, we'll take that, inject air into our system, and use a set of valves, one set for each torch or each burner. We have gas and air. Mix them together in the proper ratios, send it down the line onto our torches, and at that point we are ready to bend the glass. So with that, I'll move over here to some of the torches and just kind of show you and describe some of the basic functions therein. The first one I want to talk about is the 16-inch ribbon burner. This particular unit is used for making the large sweeping bends in circles, script lettering, and so forth. We can adjust our flame everywhere from just a couple of inches all the way up to 16 inches long. We can do that by pushing the slider in or out. The farther out we pull it, the longer ribbon of fire we're going to have. Once again, this is used for our big curves, and we'll be using that this afternoon. From there, I'm going to walk over here and show you 2 different crossfires. The first one we're looking at is the DA21. It is a cannon fire. This particular torch is used for making the small bends, the tight bends, the double backs, welds, and so forth. A large percentage of what we do will be performed using this particular torch. It gives us a nice round flame from both sides. When we put our glass in the center, we're getting heat all the way around it. So it's a very, very nice torch. I really like using that one. And then if we move over here, you can see we've got the 5-finger or 5-point crossfire. I call it the 5-point crossfire because there are 5 individual torches. They all converge together to make one nice hot spot right in between the 2. You can get this in either 5, 6, or 7 point crossfires. And these are probably one of the more widely used torches in the industry. A lot of the old timers really like using these because they do produce a very hot flame, and it doesn't require a lot of time spent in the fire to make your bends. Those are the three we use to bend our glass. Then we have one more. We've got this hand torch, our tipping torch, which is used for welding our neon unit to our manifold system, which we'll be doing later on in the video. But it's also used for tubulating. If you have to tubulate a piece of glass, make a small fine weld, or even if you're working on some border tubing and you wanted to weld two large pieces of glass together that were just too awkward to hold in your hands, you could set them down and weld them together that way. So those are the four basic torches that we'll be using, as well as our air gas manifold system. So having said that, let's step back behind here and fire them up, get started in the glass. Now we talked about all the equipment you'll be using. We're going to go ahead and start making a few of the basic bends that you'll need to learn if you want to bend neon. That noise you hear in the background is our blower. Our blower once again supplies the air to our torches, which gives us our heat. There are 6 basic bends in neon. I have them illustrated here behind me on the chalkboard here. We've got our standard weld. We've got an L bend or a 90 bend. We've got a double back or a U-turn. We've got our drop turn, a rise turn, and an offset. We're going to go through each of these bends. I'm going to show you how to mark your glass, how to heat your glass, and then how to bend your glass. If we can accomplish these bends with a little bit of proficiency, then we'll be able to put together a sign. We're going to start with the weld. But before I do that, I'm going to take a piece of glass. And glass comes in 4-foot lengths or 5-foot lengths. We're going to be using just some clear lead crystal glass, and we're going to cut it into several sections and practice our welds. So I'm going to take this moment just kind of show you. We'll take our file, lay it down on our glass, turn it up on its side at 45 degrees, scar it, time or two, then our glass should just break. Let me do that again. I'm going to cut this into 4 pieces. I scar it, and it breaks real easy. I'm going to do it again. And it'll break. Now what I've done, I have a pattern here on my table. We'll just assume that I'm making a sign. I've got it all laid out. My first bend, of course, is going to be the weld. So I'm going to take my pattern, I'm going to lay it down. I'm going to put my screen over the top of it. I'm going to make sure there's nothing in my way that's going to hinder my bending. I'm going to take one piece of glass, put a cork in the end of it, and the other piece of glass, I'm going to put my blowhose on it. Switch my blowhose around, get it on the right side of me. I'm just more comfortable that way. Several things I want to mention at this time is the proper way to stand and hold the glass. We want to hold the glass with our palms up and our fingertips. We roll the glass while it's in the fire. For a weld, we don't need to heat up too much. All I'm going to do is take and heat up the front edge of that, the front edge of this, drop below the fire, put them together like so, roll them into each other, and heat it up a little more to get it good and hot, pull it out, and blow a little bit into it just to kind of straighten it out. I'll do a couple of these and you just follow along. Got my blowhose on my mouth, bring the glass in, kind of heat up the ends. My palms are up and my elbows are in. I'm standing comfortably behind the fire. Just going to kind of roll it around a little, right in the center of the fire. Not above it, not below it, and not into one side. I want to be right in the center there. I'm waiting for the ends of the glass to get nice and red. When they do, I'll drop below, push them together, roll them into one, come up here and just kind of roll it around in the fire. Get it nice and hot, bring it out, blow a little bit. Just kind of puff on it a little bit. Then take it over, lay it down on my pattern. I can roll it back and forth if I need to get it straight. Once it cools, I'm going to have a nice strong splice in my glass. We don't want to push our glass together to where it bunches up and leaves big knobs of glass. We want to make sure it's nice and smooth. This is going to take some practice. You won't get it on your first time more than likely. So don't get frustrated if you try it. It doesn't turn out that way. I'm going to go ahead and take another piece of glass and show you one more time how we do another weld. Take one piece of glass and put it in my cone. Put a cork in the other piece of glass. And then once again, all I'm going to do is heat up the two ends of that, touch them together, roll them into each other, take it back in the fire, anneal it if you will, and then take it out and give it a little bit of a puff. We don't want to blow while it's in the fire, because all it takes is just a little bit of air and you'll blow a hole right through the side of it. So you might be real careful about that. We're just going to work it around in the fire. We're in the center of the fire once again, not too high, not too low. We let the ends get nice and warm. Drop down, push them together, come back up, roll it around a little bit. There we go. Take it to our pattern. Give it just a little bit of a puff. I'm going to roll this. Make sure it's nice and straight. Let that cool for just a moment. You can bring it up. You can see now we've got a nice weld in the middle there. If it's done properly, you won't have lumps or bulges or anything. If you get lumps and bulges and things like that, chances are you might be blowing a bit too hard, or you're pushing the glass together too hard. So these are just a few things you might want to think about as you're putting your glass together. The weld is a fairly simple bend, and it shouldn't take too long to pick up on that. It'll take a while to become proficient, but all we can do at that point is practice. The next one I want to show you is the L bend. It's the same as a 90-degree bend. Now you may have noticed that I've got some dash marks on all of these bends. The reason I put that on there is so that you, the viewer, I can show you where we mark our glass. Those marks indicate to me how far I need to go from left to right, how big a section I need to heat up in order to make the glass form into that bend. If I don't heat up enough glass, my bend's not going to turn out the way that it should. So I'm going to grab the next pattern, which will be the 90. I'll lay that down on my table, put my screen over it, and you can see I've got my marks here, here, and here, and I'll show you how I did that. We'll put some glass up to it, put my screen over it, and I'll grab another piece of glass. This one I think I'll just cut in two pieces. We'll do a couple of bends here. Once again, we just scar the glass and snap it right in two. I'll put a cork in each piece. Set one of them aside. Now because this is clear glass, you can see right through it, I'm going to use a soapstone to mark this one. I'm going to lay my glass on my pattern, and I'm going to look at where I've got my marks. For a 90-degree bend, we want to mark our center mark on the inside of the bend. So I'll make one mark right there on the center. Then I want to go 1 times the diameter out from the center and 1 times the diameter in, or left and right if you prefer. So I'll come out here and I'll mark that and mark that. So when all is said and done, I'll have 3 marks on my glass. I'll have my center mark, outside, and inside. That tells me that when I get in the fire, I've got to move my glass from here to here through the fire. I want to heat up this much glass all the way around to get a good consistent heat. If I get that heated up properly all the way around, then my bend should form up real nice when all is said and done. I'm going to put my blowhose on the other end, take my glass, once again, my palms up, keeping my elbows in. I don't want my arms out flying around because I'll get a real sloppy look if I do that. So I'll keep my elbows in, keep my palms up, hold the glass in my fingertips, put my blowhose on my mouth, and then I'll come over here. Now, if you watch my hands, I'm rolling the glass 360 degrees around and around. I'm also moving from mark to mark. I'm going from left to right, heating up that section of glass that I just marked off my pattern. So if I've marked this right and I bend to my marks, I should match my pattern with no problem. So you can see how important it is to mark it correctly. Once it gets hot, I pull it up to the top of the fire and I rock the bottom of it over it.
and I bring both hands up together. Lay it down on my pattern, give it a little bit of a puff, and there I have it. Now if you're watching, you saw when I had my glass in my hand, I didn't do this. I didn't move one leg up, or I didn't move the other leg up. I let both hands move together. That way gravity is going to pull. This part is hot. Gravity is going to pull that down. It's going to give me a nice smooth surface on the outside as well as on the inside if I've got a good consistent heat. If I get all flat on the inside and flat on the outside, it means I didn't heat it up properly. But you can see that this L bend turned out pretty nice. It matches my pattern, so from there I can go on. I'm going to go ahead, set this aside, and take up my second piece of glass, and we'll do another one. First thing I want to do is lay my glass on my pattern, mark the center of my bend, which will be the inside of the L or the 90. Then I'll mark 1 times the diameter out and 1 times the diameter in, and there I've got 3 marks. I don't know if you can see those well or not, but I've got 3 individual marks giving me about an inch width there. Put my blowhose back on one end. I've already got my cork in the other end. Stick the other end of my blowhose in my mouth. Heat it up just like I did the last one. Once it gets warm, I bring my glass up to the top of the fire so that the bottom of my glass is running along the top of my flame, and I just rock it back and forth. I do that because if I can heat this up on the back a little more, that glass will stretch a little easier. It'll make a nice uniform bend. So now let's get back in the fire, and I immediately start to move my glass. I don't want to get it too hot in any one spot, so I'm going from left to right, mark to mark, rotating the glass the whole time I'm in there. Got my arms in, my hands are working together. It's starting to get soft, so I come up a little bit. I rock the bottom out, bring both hands up. Give a little bit of a puff, just a little, doesn't take much. Lay it down on my pattern, work it into place. Now once again, I've moved both hands up together, and I let gravity pull that hot glass down as my hands are moving up. So it makes for a nice uniform bend. And you can kind of see right there, we got a nice L. It's curved on the inside, curved on the outside. We can look down the end of that. If we look straight on down, we can see a nice round circle. That means the diameter of the glass is the same all the way around. We can look at it this way and see that it's good. So you'll use your 90-degree bends or your L bends quite a bit, so you'll want to be sure and practice on those as much as possible. We're going to move on to our next bend. We've talked about the weld and the L bend, or the 90-degree bend, whatever you refer to it as. Now we're going to move into the double back. Double back is what some people might refer to as a U-turn. So I'm going to take a piece of glass. Well, first of all, I'm going to switch patterns. Kind of getting ahead of myself there. I'll pull out my double back. Lay it down on my table. Put my screen over it. Then I'm going to take a piece of glass. I'm just going to cut it in half. We're going to do a couple of double backs. Stick a cork in each end. Put my file away, make sure everything's out of my way so nothing will interfere with my bend. Then what I want to do, lay my glass on my pattern. We're going to mark this. We'll mark this a little bit different. If you recall, on the L bend, we marked our center mark on the inside. On our double back, we're going to mark our center line on the outside. So I'll lay my glass on there, match it up to the pattern, mark my center line, then I'm going to go 1.5 in and 1.5 out. The reason we go 1.5 each way this time is because we're going to need to heat up a little more glass than we did last time. It takes a little more glass to make this bend. It's a little bigger. What we want to do with this is heat it up from left to right, mark to mark, turning it all the way around the whole time we're in the fire. Then once it gets hot enough, we'll bring it up. We'll rock the bottom of the glass along the top of the fire and bring both hands up together. Now if you get it a little short on one side or you need to adjust, You can raise one hand up or pull one hand down, whatever you need to do. But our eventual goal is to make it nice and smooth on the inside and smooth on the outside. I'm going to put my blow hose in my mouth. I'm going to think about where I'm going to go with this, then I'll come on over to the fire. And I start to move my glass. Got my elbows in, my palms up. Everything's going good. I keep moving my glass from mark to mark, left to right, right to left. Turning it at 360 degrees all the way around, getting a good consistent heat all around the glass. You'll find that your double backs are going to take a few moments longer to heat up because you're heating up more glass. My glass is starting to get warm, so I bring it up a bit. I rock the bottom of it across the flame, bring it up, both hands together, and there's my double back. Now I'll bring it over, lay it on my pattern, and mold it to shape. You notice I'm giving it a few puffs of air every now and then just to keep that glass expanded. The natural tendency of the glass when you make a bend like that is to collapse within itself. So if you keep the pressure inside, you'll find that your bends are a lot smoother. Let that cool there for just a moment. Kind of pick it up and show you. We've got a nice smooth curve on the outside, nice smooth curve on the inside. Our glass is the same diameter all the way around. So that's how you do a double back. We'll go ahead and take this other half and try it one more time. Start by laying our glass on our pattern, making our center mark to the outside of our double back, 1.5 in, 1.5 out. Stick our blow hose on there and we're ready to go. I'm moving from left to right, from mark to mark. I never stop. Spinning it round all the way. Keep it moving, watching the glass, making sure my hands work together. I don't want one hand going out and the other hand coming in. I want them both going out together, the same side. You'll notice if your hands aren't working together that you'll stretch the glass. I bring it up, heat the bottom, bring both my hands up together. I let gravity pull that bend down for me. Then I'll put it on my pattern. And it matches up real nice. One way we can tell if we're heating up the right amount of glass is if we look at this, we can see that our marks are right across from each other. I don't know if you can see that or not, but our marks are straight across from each other and our center mark is right in the center of our bend. So we've done a good job with this. Worked out real well. There's one way you can tell, or several ways you can tell, but the way I always look at it, if my double back is too tight, I want to be able to get a piece of, if it's made out of 12 mil glass, I want to be able to get a piece of glass same size through there. If I'm making this double back out of 10 mil, I want a 10 mil gap in there, or 15, and so on. That's one way you can tell if you've got them too doggone close together. If you bend these right, they'll be a nice sturdy bend. You won't have to worry about any structural problems with your sign as far as collapsing on a bend. Well, that's the first 3 bends. Let's switch to our next bend, which we've got here. It's called the drop turn. Now, I'll grab my pattern here, kind of go over this with you real quick. Our drop turn, we're going from one level to another level. We're going from our table height to our block height. And we'll show you how to do that and make it a little more clear. I'll go ahead and put this pattern down on my table. And this is a drop turn, so that indicates to me we're starting up high. I'm going to take my block and place it on my pattern. I'm going to take another piece of glass, cut it in half. Go ahead and put my corks in it, get everything lined up and ready. I'll set one aside. Now eventually, you're going to come across a situation where you need to weld or splice 2 letters together. When we do neon, we reverse our pattern. We want the face of our sign to be nice and flat. Everything on the back is up on a second level. That's what this block is for. This keeps our second level nice and flat. We're going to take and start from our upper level and move back down to our table as if we were already up from a previous letter. So what I want to do is take a look at it, stand over it, see what I've got. I'm going to take and I'm going to mark my glass to the outside. The center line of my glass, or the center of my bend, will be the outside. Then I'll go 1.5 out and 1.5 in. So I've got my 3 marks. I've got my center line, which is on the outside of the bend. I go 1.5 each way. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put my blow hose on there, but then I'm going to get it hot. I'm going to let gravity pull it down. As gravity pulls it down, I'm going to swing it around. I'm not going to let it fall all the way down. I'm going to control that fall. But then when I swing it around and put it back on my block, the other leg of my bend will be flat on my table. We're heating up the same amount of glass we did for the double back. We're going to get in here, we're going to go from mark to mark. I'm going to turn it round and round and round. I keep moving all the time. Once it gets soft, you'll see it'll start to drop. Glass is starting to get a little bit warm. You can see it's dropping. I bring it out, swing it around, put it down on my pattern. I'm going to give it a little bit of a puff of air, line it up, and there I go. It all happens kind of fast, so you got to be on your toes. We just let that drop and we swung it around. And what we did, we've taken it from a higher level back down to the table. So you can see all it really is, we've done a 90 when we drop and then a 90. I just prefer to make it all in one bend. I think it's a little bit easier. You can try it both ways and do whatever you feel is most comfortable for you. I'll go ahead and show you another one of those. Lay our glass on our pattern, make our mark. We start at the outside for our center, then we go 1.5 in and 1.5 out, and that's 1.5 times the diameter of the glass. So we're going to look at, if this is 12, we'll go 1.5, which would be 18 millimeters both ways. That way we know we've got enough glass heated up, if we heat it properly in the fire, to make that bend. I'm going to go back in. I immediately start to move. It'll probably take a little while to get used to turning the glass all the time while moving your hands from left to right. But once you see how much easier it makes it, it's hard to talk while I've been. We're getting kind of warm here. I let it drop, swing it around, give it a puff of air, put it on my pattern. There we go. Everything lines up. It's nice and smooth. Now if I were to go on and make a letter here, I could cut this right here and weld 2 letters together. All I would do is a rise turn, which is what we're going to work on next. But this is where we'd work behind the letter. That's what this is generally for. As you can see, comes up and over, down and over, whichever way you want to look at it. I'll just set that aside. The secret there is just to take your time and keep heating the glass. You got to get it pretty warm. That'll take care of the drop turn. Now, this next turn, which is the rise turn, some people like to refer to them as the same as the drop turn, which it really is. It's just one's in reverse. I'm showing you both of them so you can get a feel for the difference, and then once you get the idea, you can do it either way. But this rise turn, we'll start on the tabletop plane and we'll bring it out and over and move to our higher plane or our block. So in order to do that, we're going to need more glass. So I'll take and cut another piece here. Cut that in half. You notice when I cut the glass, you don't really have to press real hard on it. You just take the edge of that file and scar it. It'll snap real easy for you. Now since I know I'm going to do a rise turn, I'm going to start on my table. I'll mark my glass, same as the others. I'm going to mark it the outside of my bend, and I'll go 1.5 out and 1.5 in. Now, once I make that rise and bring it out, I want to have something to rest my glass on. So I'm going to take and use my block. I'll just set my block out there a little ways, and that'll give me sort of a register or a gauge to go by for the height of my glass. At this point, put my blow hose on, put the mouthpiece back in, come back over to my crossfire, and start once again. I started to say something earlier about moving your hands and working the glass in your fingers, then I kind of got sidetracked. But once you get the feel for this glass, or any glass, and you get that rhythm down, it'll all just become second nature to you. I'm going to heat this up nice and warm. This is kind of a two-stage full. I'm going to rock it out just like I did my 90, heating the bottom of the glass. I'm going to bring it over, just like that. Then I'll line it up on my glass, give it a couple of puffs of air, and everything lines up real nice. Now what I did, I'll let that cool for just a moment. I had my straight piece of glass. I did a 90-degree bend in it, bent it up like so. So I had my 90, which got me up. Then I brought it over. Here's my first 90 right here. Then here's my second 90. So what I did, I took the glass, bent it up, got a 90 in it, turned it back over, and then handed it out. Just moved it away from me. And that got me a nice rise turn. As you can see, you turn it over, it's the same as a drop turn. Just some people, it's difficult to think in terms of 3 dimensions, so we have 2 different bends, a rise turn and a drop turn, and it just depends on how you want to think about it. But I'll grab this drop turn out of here. You can see if I turn the drop turn over, it's the same as a rise turn. Whereas, here's the way I bend it on the pattern. Here's my drop and here's my rise. They both come up and meet at the same plane. That way, if we had to connect these two, we can cut it right here and weld them on the back of the sign, and it wouldn't be quite as noticeable. Let's go ahead and do another rise turn. Learning through repetition here. Takes a lot of practice. We'll mark our center, 1.5 and 1.5. Don't be discouraged if you don't get these the first time through. I've been bending for quite a while, and it took me a long time to learn as well. But if you stick with it, and just remember what we've talked about here, it'll eventually come to you. I'm back in my fire. I'm going from one mark to the next, back and forth, turning my glass, getting a good consistent heat all the way around on the glass. And watch when I get it warm enough to where it starts to bend. At that point, I'll bring it up to the top of the fire like I've done all the others. Right now, I'll do it. I bring it up, and I just rock the bottom of that over that fire. I make my 90. There's my 90. And I bring it over. Then I line it up with my pattern, giving it a few puffs of air in between there. I'll let that cool for a moment. One of the hardest things about doing this particular bend is when you move from the fire to the pattern. You want to be thinking in your mind the whole time, okay, I'm up, then I turn around. You notice I have my fire real close because I don't like to have to walk all the way across my table to lay it down. The further I have to move with it, the greater chances are that I'm going to spoil my bend. And I know that if I can only just turn here at my hips and lay it down on my pattern, I've eliminated a lot of that unnecessary movement. Here's my rise turn. Nice and consistent all the way around. I've got a 90 and a 90. So it worked out real well. I'm going to set that aside, and we'll talk about one more bend, and then we'll just kind of recap. The next bin we're going to talk about, show it to you up here, is the offset. You might recognize that. It looks kind of like the center of the letter N. The offset is really no more than a double back in which we've taken one of the legs, we've set it up on its side, and pushed it over. And I'll show you just exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to cut a piece of glass. Cork up my ends. I'm going to grab my pattern over here, lay it out. And I'm leaving my block in place because one leg is going to be higher than the other. I'll just set that block out there. Now if you remember on the double back, we marked from the outside of our bend, and we went out 1.5 and in 1.5. Our marks are going to be the same for the offset. So I'm going to take and I'm going to mark this. The outside of my bend will be my center. I'll go in 1.5, out 1.5, and we're ready to go. Now I have to think about where I'm going to go with this. I'm going to do my double back, and then I'm going to push it aside. For the back of my fire, I'm heating up all the way around my marks. I'm actually going just a little bit past my marks. Moving the glass, working it round and round. Starting to get soft. You'll be able to feel when the glass starts to get soft. You don't want to come out too early. If you don't get your glass hot enough, your bend's really going to show. We get this nice and hot, just like we would a double back. We bring it up, rock the bottom of it across there, get it good and hot, bring it up, do a double back, and then just push one leg out, just like so. Then bring it down to our pattern. Give it a little puff of air, and there we go. Now I'll take my blow hose off. Did you see how similar that was to the double back? All we did was just do a 90-degree, or a double back, took one leg up at the top and pushed it over. I'll do another one here. Start out by marking my glass, laying it on the pattern. Center, 1.5, 1.5. Get my blow hose in place. Do you see how handy my block was there? It keeps my glass from falling back down to the table. Come over here into the fire. Turning and turning. The glass is starting to get warm. You can feel it in my fingers. At this point, I'm thinking about my next step, which will be to bring it up above the flame and rock the bottom, just like I'm doing now. Now both hands are working together. They're both coming together. I bring it out, have my double back, bring it over to my pattern, and swing it out wide. Give it a little puff of air, and that's going to do it. There we go. We'll let that cool for just a moment. Kind of bring that up. You can see, we go up and then over. And we're on two different planes. We've gone from the tabletop up to our secondary plane. Now if we wanted to make, say, the letter N, we'd come in and mark it for another offset. Do the same thing, pointing the other way, and we'd be ready to go. Well, those are the 6 bends. Let's kind of review here off the chart. I want to go over these one more time. The first one we talked about was the weld. We took 2 pieces of glass together and fused them together, or spliced them. We did that just by heating up the ends, pushing them together a little bit, and then pulling them out. We went over to the L bend. We made that by marking our glass from the center. We went one side of the diameter out and one side of the diameter of the glass in. Then we just moved both hands together and let gravity pull that center down. We did our double back by marking the outside of the glass at the center first, then 1.5 times in and 1.5 times out, both hands working together. Our drop turn and our rise turn, marked both of these from the outside, 1.5 in, 1.5 out, same for both of them. The only difference is one we lift up on and hand out. The other we drop down on and push out. Then of course number 6, the one we just showed you, was the offset, which is very similar to our double back. We marked it in the same location. We marked the center of our bend on the outside of the pattern. We went 1.5 times in and 1.5 times out. Did our double back and then pushed it out to the side using our block for support. Well, those are the 6 bends that you need to know and become somewhat proficient at to make a neon sign. At this point, since we've talked about all these, you might want to go and practice and see what you can do. If you have any questions or concerns, come back, review the tape, take a look at it, pay attention to moving the glass the whole time, keeping your hands moving together rather than doing one of these numbers, moving in and out all the time, and be sure and turn it the whole time you're in there. The key to a good bend is to get that heat consistent all the way around the glass. Now that we've talked about all 6 bends, let's incorporate those in a sign. So I'm going to run out and get a sign pattern, come back in, and we'll make a sign. Now that we've talked about all 6 of the bends that we'll be using in neon, I want to design a sign that will incorporate all of these bends to kind of show you how they're used in virtually all types of signs. The sign design that I've chosen, we're going to do the word DACO. It's on a piece of white paper here, and I've got just block letters, D-A-C-O. What I've done is I've outlined each one, and that's going to be the path with which I bend my glass. In neon, we always work off the back of the pattern, or the back of the sign. So what I did was I reversed the pattern. Once I've got it reversed, I'll draw where my electrodes are going to be. I've got it indicated here by black dots or X's, and then where I want to connect each letter so that they all connect and I make one unit. This is going to be a pretty simple sign. If you notice, I've got some big curves and we haven't talked about those yet. I've got the O, the C, the D. What we're going to do there is introduce the ribbon burner, which we spoke about earlier in the shop equipment section of this video. So we'll get into that. For the sake of this video, however, I find it somewhat difficult to see this pattern laying down on the table with a white background. So what I have done, and that's just for the sake of the video, I've transferred this pattern to a blue piece of paper to make it show up a little bit better for the camera. Now, what I've done is I've drawn my paths from where I want to connect the glass. That to me indicates that I can do one letter at a time if I need to, or I can do more than one, but I can cut it anywhere along that path and weld the two together. And then my welds will be on the back rather than on the front. I've also made note of where I want to put my electrodes. I'll put an electrode at each end, and having all that planned out, my next decision was which color to use. Since thus far we've been working with clear glass, I thought it'd be kind of nice if we did this in a powdered glass. So I've chosen to go with a powdered blue glass, and it should take, according to my measurements that I've done on my map wheel, I traced all around, I should be able to do this in about 2 sticks of glass. So having said that, I'm going to turn my pattern over, decide where I'm going to start. I think I'll start down here at the letter D. I'm going to place my pattern over my screen over the pattern, get my glass out, put my cork in it, go over. I'm going to turn on my torches. I'm going to take and light up my torches. That'll kind of quiet it down. I'm going to walk over here and light up my hand torch. We don't want to be sniffing gas throughout the rest of this video. Alright, now that they're all lit, we'll come on back and decide how we want to attack this particular sign. Like I said earlier, I want to start with the letter D. I'll just start at one end and work my way through. So what I need to do is figure out how much glass is going to take to make this letter D and where I want to start on the letter. I think it's safe to say that it's always easiest if you start in the middle of the letter. That way you're not bending the glass into yourself, or you don't intersect where you've already bent. So what I'm going to do is take my glass, figure out how much I need for this leg, the back leg of my D, kind of put it up there, leave myself a long enough handle to hang on to without burning my fingers. I'll mark my first bend on my bend here, and you notice I'm using a pencil now rather than the chalk because it's going to show up better on the white glass. I'll mark my first bend, then I'll turn my glass and prepare for my second bend because I'm going to do my big sweeping second bend first. Then I'll come back and drop down. That way, if I'd start with this leg first and go and bend my big curve on the letter D, my glass is going to run into itself. And I really don't want to work that way. So in order for me to measure the amount of glass I need to heat, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take my blow hose, lay it down on the pattern, on the glass and the pattern, and just kind of measure out using my blow hose how much glass I need. Then I'll mark it. And I'm ready to go. I've always found that it's best to bend my glass up in the air rather than to the side. So, in preparing for this bend, I'm going to turn my pattern sideways, lay it out. When I make my bend in the ribbon burner, when I come back, it'll be down nice and flat, heading away from me. That's one of the benefits of having a nice big table. I'm going to scoop my crossfire out of the way, pull my ribbon burner into view, kind of slide that in here. Lay my glass up next to the ribbon burner, and I'm going to adjust my flame to the desired length. I want to make it long enough to heat up all that glass I just spoke of. Then I'll go in, kind of preheat the back, and then start turning. I just let my glass set on top of that fire, or inside the fire, not necessarily laying down on it, but I'll roll it around 360 degrees the entire time it's in there. You can see my hands are still palms up. All I'm really doing is just heating a bigger section of glass, trying to make a big curve. Rolling the glass around in the fire, being sure to get all sides equal heat. And once it gets soft, I kind of rock it in the fire. Kind of make my curve right here like so. Then I bring it up into the air, let gravity make that curve for me, bring it down, and lay it on top of my pattern. Now if I need to, if I've got a little bit of a curl, I can grab my block and just set it on top of there. And that'll take some of that curl out. This actually came out pretty good, so I'm not really going to mess with it. Now, I'll let that set for a moment, kind of harden up. My next bend will be my double back here. I'm going to turn my pattern here. As you can see, my glass is like so. I'm going to make a double back here and head on over towards my A. I know that I'm going to go up on a second level, so I'm going to place my block out a ways where my glass can rest on my block once I get to that second level. I put my glass on my pattern. I've got my double back right here, so I mark the outside of my double back, 1.5 in, 1.5 out. Switch my blow hose around. And since I'm right-handed, I'm going to turn this around and go the other way. After looking at it, I think that I might be better served if I turn my pattern like so. Having turned my pattern, I also want to turn my block. Make sure everything's out of my path. I'll put my screen back on. My marks still line up. Put my blow hose on my glass, and I'm ready to go. Now you might find that it's a little awkward from time to time getting in the fire. You'll see I'm bending from one side now, but my procedure is still the same. I still go from block to block, around and round. That orange flash I'm getting on there indicates to me that my glass is a little bit too rich, or my gas flame is just a little bit too rich. So I'm going to step over here and turn that down just a bit, because I don't want to smoke my glass. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I'll step on back in there and see how that does. Still just a little bit rich. Let me go turn it down one more time. We don't want that orange flare coming up on the sides of our glass. If you leave it in there too long, with a powdered glass or with any glass, it's going to smoke the glass and you'll get a dark buildup on your glass. I've turned it down a little bit more, maybe that'll do it. That seems to do it. So now I'll come back in and pick up where I left off. I'm moving from mark to mark, left to right, but I'm working on one side of the fire. And heat it up good, turn it all around. Get it nice and warm. Starts to bend, so I heat up the back. And I do my double back. Just adjust it where it needs to be. Bring it down to my pattern. Kind of muscle it into place. And there I go. Now, having done that, I'll come back to my original bend and bend the back side of the letter D. I'll mark the inside. This is going to be a 90-degree bend, so I'll mark the inside. I'll go one out and one in. Now, I don't want to drag my blow hose across the table and pull on the back of my neck, because that might screw up my bend. So what I'm going to do is switch the cork to the other end, switch my hose around, put my swivel on the other end, and go at it this way. This is going to be a pretty simple bend. We're just going to do a straight 90, moving in the fire all the time, getting a good consistent heat all the way around, moving in and out, left to right. Glass is starting to get soft on me, so I raise it up above the fire, still rubbing across the back of that glass, make my bend in the air, and there you go. All right, that's pretty good. I'm pleased with that. Still true to my pattern. So now, in order to finish this D off, I'm going to put an electrode down here on the end. While this double back we just did is still warm, I can get back in the fire and get relatively close to it without stressing the glass. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to mark for my double back outside 1.5 and 1.5, and I'm going to go ahead and do my double back. That way, when I'm ready to put on my electrodes, I can cut it off and just weld it right on without worrying about heating up any additional bends. So I heat that up just like I would any other bend, working off my marks. When you're working on a sign, you can see just how important it is to make your marks in the proper places. It's also just as important to bend your marks. You want to be sure and use the glass that you've heated between the marks to make your bend so you don't stretch it or end up too long on your pattern. There we go. Now I'll bring it back, lay it down. Just going to hold that up for a moment. And there's our letter D. Now, the next thing I need to do is come in here and start doing my letter A. So I'm going to want to do a drop turn to get down to my table again. Then I'll start working out all the bends on my letter A. Well, in order to do that, I need to turn my pattern around, put my screen back on. I'll move my block to the other side and put my cork on the other end. So my next step, like I say, is to get back down on the table. So I make sure my D lines up. Come in here with my pencil and mark where I want to drop. Here's my drop turn, so I'll come to the outside, go 1.5 and 1.5, and all I'm going to do is just drop it right down on the table. There's no need to get in any big hurry with this. You can take your time. We're heating up the glass, get it nice and soft. Let gravity pull it down. Then I'll swing it around. And because we marked it properly, it's going to fall right into place. Now, I've already got one leg of my A, but I have a decision to make. What's my next bend going to be? If I take and weigh out all the options, my next bend, I think would be best served if I come in here and do the center, get into the center, and then come back out and finish the rest of the A. If I decide to come up here, come down, and go back in, I'm going to end up having a pretty nasty looking letter. So what I need to do is just sit here and think about it for a minute, and I've decided I'm going to do this little 90-degree bend. It's not quite a 90 actually, it's a little less than a 90. We'll go ahead and mark it as a 90. Mark our center, outside, and inside. And then I'm going to turn my pattern. That way my glass is bending away from me. And I'm going to go back in and I'm going to bend this center leg right here. It's a 90-degree bend, so I don't have to worry about coming up off to another plane or anything like that. I'm just moving it nice and easy. Get it warm. Make my bend in the air. Bring it down. Drop it right on my pattern. So far, everything's working out real well. And I like what I see thus far. Now, if you do one letter fine and the next letter you screw up on or have a problem with, take and cut it somewhere along the back and weld in the letter. When you're first getting started, it's sometimes easier to do each letter independently and then weld them all together. That way you're not working with such big pieces of glass. For my next move in this letter A, I've got to come back out here and finish this leg. So what I want to do is make a double back right here and come back out. So I'll mark my double back in 1.5 and 1.5. And you're probably saying, well, now your glass is going to come up and be a little bit high. And you're right, it will be, but we'll compensate for that in the bend right after that. So for right now, we're going to go ahead and make that double back. Do it just like any other double back. Get it nice and warm. Bring it up, heat up the back of it. Bring both hands together. And come on over to my pattern. All right. Very good. Now what I need to do is come back down to my table. So I'll mark my glass. I'm going to do a drop turn. I mark the outside of my bend here on the A, 1.5 in, 1.5 out. And I go back to the fires. You can see why it gets a little difficult at times to make a bend. Once you get several letters together, you end up having to think a little bit about where you're going to position yourself in the fire. But like anything else, with practice, it gets a lot easier. You can see my glass is getting soft. I'm starting to move on it now. I'm going to go ahead and swing it around and just let it drop. Line it up with my pattern, kind of blow it out a little bit. The one thing I want to be sure not to do, when I drop that glass down, I want to be sure that I don't touch my other glass that's already in here. Because if two hot pieces of glass get together, or one hot and one cold, they're going to stick and you're going to end up having a mess on your hands. Alright, we can finish this A by doing an offset. Right up here at the top. So I'll mark it like an offset, go to the outside of my bend, 1.5, 1.5. Then, so I'm not bending the glass into myself, I'll turn the pattern around. Switch sides on my blow hose. And I'm going to put my block out here. Hold my glass up while it's hot. I'll come back into the flame. Heat it up, moving on my march from left to right. Heat the back of that up. Do a double back and swing it around. Okay, everything's lining up pretty good. Now I don't want to leave that up on a higher plane. I want to be back down on my table for this A because I want it to look natural. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here right off of the heat that I just put into my offset. I'm going to heat up a little area. Doesn't take much, but we'll heat up a little area and then just let gravity pull it right back down to the table. So I'm going to turn my pattern around, line it back up, make sure I'm in the right area, come on back into the fire, and like I say, it's not really a bend. All I'm doing is just heating it up and let gravity pull it back down to the table. We'll just call this a drop. I heat it up, you can see gravity's just kind of taking over. Good. All right. Now I've got one more bend to do. I'm just kind of matching it up to my pattern. I've got one more bend to do, which will be a rise turn, so I can connect to my C on the back of the pattern. So I'll mark my rise turn accordingly. That'd be the outside, as we've mentioned many a time before. 1.5 out, 1.5 in. I'll put my block in place, and I'll go ahead and do my rise turn. We'll have 2 letters out of the way. Gonna get it nice and hot. Do a rise turn just like we showed in the last part of the video. Up and over. And my block will hold it in place. Okay. Let that solidify for a moment, kind of cool. As it cools, it'll become rigid. And you can see we're about halfway there. We've got the D and the A. Everything looks pretty good. Meets my pattern. So I'm just going to set this aside. Let it cool. I'll stand it in a rack over here. Then I've got to get started on my C and my O. Well, now as I look at these 2 letters, I realize that the C is pointing right into the O. So in order to do this, I'm going to have to bend into myself. Well, we can do that with a little practice, but I think for the sake of this video, I think I'm going to do each letter independently. So I'm going to grab a stick of glass, cut it in half, and I'll start with both of these are going to be done in the ribbon burner, so I'm going to start with my letter C. I'm going to turn my pattern sideways so I bend away from myself. I'm going to lay my C up there. I'll move my cork to the other end because what I want to do is this bottom leg first. I want to do this bottom half first, but I'm going to start what will appear to be almost in the center. I'm going to make my mark right here. I'll mark it with my pencil. Then I'll measure with my hose just like I did for the letter D. Measure it, see how much glass I need. Bring it on down. Make my second mark. And now I know just what I need to heat. And the reason I'm doing this, if I do this portion first, my glass will be heading off this way. Well, when it's heading off that way, I can do a double back and bring it on back in towards the A. So when I do my last part of my C, or the top of my C, I don't run into myself. So I'm going to move this cannon fire out of the way. We'll bring back the ribbon torch, or ribbon burner, adjust our slide to the amount of flame we need, and we'll go ahead and heat up the bottom of that C. Now remember, in the ribbon fire, you don't have to move from left to right because you've got a longer flame. All you have to do is turn it around 360 degrees all the time. When it starts to get soft, just flip it 180 degrees. As you can see, it's starting to get soft, so I just go 180 degrees back and forth. All I'm doing is just kind of breaking up that straight line and getting a curve on both the inside and the outside. Once it gets so soft, I think it might get away, I'll just bring it up and rock it a little bit, do my curve in the air. Then I lay it down on my pattern, adjust it. There we go. All right. Now it's always safe to stay on the outside of your curve. By that I mean we don't want our glass ending up on the inside of our curve. We want to be out here if anything. Because once you get it inside, it's awfully hard to bring it outside without showing a hard spot in your glass. Not necessarily a hard spot, but a spot that didn't get bent properly. It's going to stick out like a sore thumb. Your eye's going to be quick to pick up on that. So now that I've got that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and come down here and mark my double back. Get that going. So I'll slide this aside, pull my crossfire back, and I'll put my block in place. So that's what I'm going to rest my glass on when it gets hot. And I'll come in here and heat my glass up. Getting it nice and hot all the way around. Come up. Both hands. Make a nice little double back. And bring it down to my pattern. And lay it in place. Okay, that worked out real nice. Now I'll just kind of let that set up. Then for the last portion of my letter C, before we connect with the other letters, I'll go ahead and bend the top of this. So what I do is I take a look at my pattern from overhead, and I say to myself, okay, where do I stop running along the pattern? I stop about right here. Well, I'm going to back up just a little bit, make a mark, and you can see it's still pretty hot. Then I'll come in, measure it, make a mark out here. Switch my cork to this end, and as soon as that cools just a bit more, we'll go back into the ribbon fire and heat up that much and finish doing our letter C. There's two things I need to mention at this time. One is, in the ribbon fire, you don't have to use your blow hose. You're heating up a large enough section of glass that it's really not good. You don't stand the chance of collapsing inside yourself. Because it's nice and big and gradual, it's going to stay a pretty consistent diameter all the way around. So we don't have to use our blow hose on the ribbon fire. I also want to mention that we need to let this glass cool down considerably. You need to almost be, well, you need to be able to touch the glass. You want it that cool. The reason being, if we go back and heat up this cool section right next to this hot section, the point where the glass puts, the point of intersection where the glass is no longer hot or no longer cool, it's going to be double heated. And we're going to get that twice as hot as everything else. So it's going to leave a flat spot in our circle or in our curve. So those are a couple things you want to be sure and think about. And this is cool enough to the touch, so I'm going to go ahead and I've got my block in place, my pattern's all good. I'm going to go ahead, get my ribbon burner back over here, and finish making the bend for the top of the C. So once again, I'll adjust my flame, and I'll just work that portion that I've got marked in the fire. And like I say, I came back in and marked up a little bit of what I'd already bent, just to be sure that I got it all nice and round and consistent. That noise that you're hearing in the background is the air blowing through this ribbon burner. They do put out quite a bit of heat. Bend it in the air, get it nice and round, bring it back to my pattern, and lay it out, and just kind of mold it into place. You'll have a little bit of time. There's no need to get into a big hurry when you're doing this. Okay, so far I like that. That matches my pattern just the way I wanted it to, but I've got to do something with this leg on the bottom of my C to make it look right. So I think what I'll do is come in and heat a little bit of it in the ribbon fire or in the crossfire. I'll probably go the crossfire for this. Heat up a little bit and swing it around so it goes along straight along the text baseline. So in order to do that, once again I'll push this crossfire back into play, get rid of the ribbon burner. I'm going to move my pattern around. And I won't need my block just yet. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and make a mark so I know exactly where to go. I'm going to bend it from right here to about right here. Like I say, not a whole lot. And all I'm doing is just going to kind of move that around so that I fall in line with where I left my A. I will need my blow hose for this. So I'll put that on there. Think about what I'm doing, put my block in place to hold my glass up, and then come on back over. Just kind of heating it up a little bit, and I'm just going to pull it into place. I'm going to stay on my upper plane. And just line it up with my pattern. There we go. Now I can easily weld that to my D and my A. Now the next thing you'll notice, now that we've got to connect it to our letter O. And on our pattern, when we looked at our layout, we decided we'd go ahead and connect it to our O down here. So in order to do that, I've got to raise that glass up and bring it onto the second plane, the higher plane. So what I'm going to do is go back in with my letter C, put my cork on this end because that's the end I'm going to be pulling on, moving around, and I'll mark just the end of it. And all I'm really going to do is just do a little rise. Earlier we did a little drop on the letter A. Now I'm going to come back and do a little bit of a rise. Just high enough to where it's on the back plane. It should rest on my block. So I'll put my block in place. And I'll heat that up and let gravity drop the letter C, and I'll leave the leg of the letter C up. Once again, I do this so I can make all my welds behind the sign rather than in front of it. Just moving it around. Glass is getting a little warm, so I let the gravity drop the letter C, give it a little bit of a blow. And I just line it up with my pattern. Okay, that worked out real well. My block was in place. Everything lines up, so it should be easy to weld. And at this time, I think I'll go ahead and grab my D and my A out and weld the two together. I'll move my screen over here. Put my C, put my A up on there. Mark that with my pen. And then I'll cut it right there with my file. This is where it pays to have a nice sharp file. You don't want to sit there and have to wrestle with it. Now before we can weld any type of powdered glass, this glass has a powder coating on the inside. We need to take and wipe that powder away from just the end of the inside. If we don't, the powder is going to sit inside that weld in between the two pieces of glass, and we'll have a leak when we go to process it. So what I generally do is just take my cork Work it right inside there. Just kind of work it around. And just empty out any loose powder that might be in there. And then I kind of blow it off. Then I'll do the same with my other side here. Making sure I get all that loose powder out. Put my cork back in my letter C. And I'll grab my blow hose and we're just going to do a simple weld. Remember on our welds, we decided we were just going to heat up the ends of the glass, get them kind of cherry up, drop below the fire, press them together, kind of work it in and out a little bit. They're nice and hot now. There you go. Bring it back, lay it on our pattern. Everything's looking good. All right. Now I'm just going to set this aside and let it cool. And we have one more letter to go. Now we've got to do the letter O. Well, we just did the letter C, and we started by doing half of it first, our double back, then the other half. I'm going to do the O the same way. I'm going to do half of it first, do my double back to where I'm going to connect to my C. Then I'll do as much of the rest of it as I can without bending into myself. I'll do a double back, heat it up, and just kind of push it right in. So in order to do that, I'm going to turn my pattern sideways, put my screen back on there. I'll use the other half of that stick of glass that I started earlier to use on my letter C. Put a cork in there. Then I'll just measure off, from here. Get out my blow hose. I'll come all the way around from, we don't need to do all of it in one big move. So we'll just do a handful. I'm going to heat up about 6 inches of glass in the ribbon fire. So I'll pull that over here. Come in and I'll adjust the slide rule for the fire that I need here. Come in and just start turning it around. Now once again, you always want to keep moving in the ribbon fire. Or in the crossfire as well, because if we get it hot in one spot, more so than the rest of the glass, you'll notice it when you go to blow it out. You can see it's starting to get soupy, so instead of a 360, I turn it to a 180. I just flip it back and forth very gently, nothing too radical. And my hands are both working together. I'm not twisting the glass or anything like that. It's getting nice and warm, so I'm going to start rocking the bottom. I do that to get it nice and smooth on the outside. I'll do as much of my bend as I can in the air, and I come over and lay it down on my pattern. I like that. Now just to make sure it's nice and flat, I can use my block if I need to. If you ever have any twists or anything going on, you'll see that it can flare up like so and it won't be flat on the pattern. That's nice and hot, so I can't go in and do the rest of that curve. So what I'm going to do is do my double back. It's going to be actually more of an offset because I want to go up and follow the line where my letter C is so that eventually I can connect to that. So I've got it marked. I marked the outside just like I would an ordinary offset. I'm going to get back in my crossfire. So move that out of the way, pull my crossfire over here. Get my blow hose on there, and I should put my block in place. And all I'm going to do is just follow my pattern. You can see why it's a little easier to do each letter independently. You're not constantly hanging on to the glass that you'd need for the letter before it or after it. So all you really have to concentrate on is that one letter at a time. There's my double back. Bring it down. lay it on my pattern, and do my offset. That matches up real nice. I'll put it on my block, making sure I'm the same height. Everything looks pretty doggone good at this point. Now, like I said earlier, I just recently did that first curve on the circle, so I've got to let that cool for a moment or two before I can go in and do the balance of my circle. Now I can do this one of two ways. I can measure out the glass I'm going to need and where it's going to end up, mark it on there, do my double back, and then do my curve. Or I can go ahead and do just a little bit shy of the end and let it go straight on out, do my double back, then take a small piece and curve it in. And I think for the sake of this video, it'd probably be better shown if we did it the latter of the two ways. So what I'm going to do is take my pencil, mark it on my pattern where I'm just starting to leave the curve, and then go back a little bit. So I'll mark it right there. Then I'll grab my blow hose, mark off a section of glass, just short of the end, because I don't want to go all the way. So what I did was I marked it from here to about right in here. That's going to leave me just about an inch left to do. Make it a little easier to handle. With my glass is cool enough right now, so I'm going to go ahead and go back in the ribbon fire, heat up that little piece, and lay it on out. So in order to do that, I'll put my crossfires back, pull my ribbon burner out one more time, adjust the flame because it's going to be a little shorter this time, and I'm ready to go. Back and forth. Starting to get warm, so I rock it a bit. Curve it up. Bring it on in. Okay, that lays out pretty nice. Match it to my pattern. Now what I'm going to do, is like I'd mentioned before, I'm going to go ahead and do my double back. Get that extra glass out of the way so I can finish it off. So I'll bring my crossfire back here. I'll mark where my glass is going to end up, and I'm going to leave a little gap in there, a little bit of space so that it doesn't arc out when we go to power it up. So I'm going to do right here, here, and here. I've made my 3 marks where I want my double back to end up. I'll switch my cord around, put my block in place, stick my blow hose on there, and I'm ready to go. Man, every now and then I catch myself like that. Fire gets very hot. Before you know it, your fingers will be numb. We're getting the glass good and hot. And we're careful not to let it touch that other double back. I'm going to kind of rub the back of it there with the fire. And just kind of blow it out. Okay, as you can see that from the above, we've got just a little bit of a gap in there. So now what I'll do, I'll just come in here a little bit, right about here. Put an X right there, I'll go down to about here, heat that up, take this handle that I've left myself, and just nudge it in, just to kind of finish off that out. Actually, I'm just going to kind of let gravity pull it in. There you go. As you can see, it didn't take much. Just kind of push it into place. Line it up with my pattern. And there I am. Now the last thing I need to do to finish the DACO is weld my O to my DAC, and I'll add my electrodes. So I'm going to set this aside and let it cool for a moment while I flip my pattern around. I'll line it up. Get my DAC back on my pattern. And I'll go ahead and cut off a little bit of this. I want to be real careful not to slam into my double back. There we go. And like I mentioned earlier, we have to be sure and rub all that powder off in between there. So we do that. Then I'll come back and grab my O. Line it up with the pattern. And make a mark right there. That's the point at which I'll cut it off. There we are. Wipe off the powder. And now I'm ready to weld the two together. I'm going to put my block out here to keep that nice and level. Put my blow hose on one end and go back to my crossfire. Cleaning up just the fronts of those. I'm careful not to expose any of the previous bends directly to that flame. Get it nice and hot, and then I'll drop it down. And I'll come back and line it up with my pattern. Okay. Now the last step I have to do before we can take it over and process it would be to weld my electrodes onto the end. So what I'll do is I'll grab a couple of electrodes and my electrode holder. Yellow, yellow. There you go. Ah, not this yellow. The one there at the bottom. Yeah, thank you. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and do my non-tubulated electrode first. There are two types of electrodes here, and I want to kind of go over that real quick with you. The electrode is the point where we hook up the wiring to it and give it life. There are two types of electrodes, tubulated and non-tubulated. The tubulated has a small 5mm hollow tube on the end of it, and it's that tube that we use to hook it up to our manifold system. We'll touch a little bit more on electrodes and characteristics here in just a few moments, but for right now we'll go ahead and put the non-tubulated electrode on the end with the D. It really doesn't matter which end it goes on. This is closer to me, and I'll go ahead and use it. Wipe off all that powder. I'm going to take and put my blow hose on one end. And my non-tubulated electrode, I'll stick in my electrode holder, slide the ring up on it. I'm ready to attach it. Just like welding a piece of glass. I'll blow it out a little. There we go. That was easy enough. Now we have one more electrode to put on there. You can see how important it is to become proficient at your welds. If we have leaks or holes in our welds, then our unit's not going to light up when we go to process it. Now for this tubulated electrode, I'm just going to stick my hose right on the end of the electrode. I'll move my screen down because it is going to get kind of warm. I'll cut off the excess glass that I'm not going to use. And of course, once again, wiping away all of the powder inside there. Now I'm ready to weld on my last electrode. Weld it on, and go back up in there and get the glass hot, blow it out, and I'm going to kind of tuck it up in there a little bit, just so it doesn't stick out on our sign. Give it a little bit of a puff. Now I'll pull my hose off, and now we're ready to go on to the next step. We've got our knife, because we bent it properly and marked our bends properly, everything came out to the pattern. So now let's go ahead and turn the torches off and head on over to the processing table, and we'll discuss the bombarding and processing procedure and see if we can't get this to light up. Hi, and welcome back. In the last section of our video, we went ahead, we prepared a neon sign, we've worked on all of our bends, now we're ready to bring that sign to life. It is this stage of the neon process where we'll put the gas into our system so that we can do just that. Before we get into that though, I'd like to discuss some of the equipment that you'll come involved with here during the processing phase. We call this the processing, the bombarding phase. And excuse my blowhose there falling off of me. But I want to speak and we'll start down here with the vacuum system. The vacuum system is what pulls all of the dirt and impurities out of the glass so we can get a good clean blow. We've got two vacuums on this system. We've got our mechanical vacuum back there. The vacuum pump is the DACO VP93, and then we've got DACO's diffusion pump. This diffusion pump looks a little bit medieval, something out of a Frankenstein movie maybe. But what it is a flask sitting in a heater element down here, controlled by a thermostat, and it's got a fluid inside there. This fluid has a very specific vaporization point. At that point, once it's heated up to that point, it'll turn to vapor, start to rise, and in these sinks here, it'll cool, attach itself to the wall, and run back down. So it's cyclic, it's an ongoing process. But as it rises, it creates an area of low pressure down in here. Well, in order for that low pressure to equalize itself, it's going to pull a vacuum off the line down from it. Hence, it's going to pull a better vacuum off our system. The two pumps working in conjunction with each other will give you a quicker, deeper vacuum. And that's really what we're looking for when we're processing our glass. We want to get it as good a vacuum as possible. From there, I'm going to walk over. We've got our power switch here, pretty self-explanatory, on, off. Then we've got our choke. This is a iron core choke, a sliding choke. The further out we slide that, the more electricity we release into the system. This choke is attached to our large transformer down here underneath the table. I don't know if you can see that very well or not. But on top of that transformer, you'll see the two posts. Those posts have wires attached to them. Those wires go up above the table, up to our Jacob's ladder. And then from our Jacob's ladder, we have our two leads coming out. One lead will come out all by itself. The other lead will run into our milliamp gauge. We use this milliamp gauge during processing so we can know exactly where we're at as far as the flow of current into our unit. It comes outside the milliamp gauge onto an alligator clip and then hooks directly up to our unit. From there, we want to come over to the heart of the system, the manifold. We are going to use the DACO Precision DE manifold system today. It's a borosilicate manifold. It's called the DE because we can pump off either end. It's double-ended. We can pump off this side or that side. However we have our shop configured, or if we're into a lot of production, we can go that route. It's going to allow us to do a lot more neon at one time. So it's going to make it a lot quicker. This particular unit, though, we've got it set up to pump just off one end. Some of the components of our manifold system would be the main stopcock, which opens up the system to the vacuum pumps down below. We've got our open air vent valve, which allows us to open it up and release the atmosphere into the system. We've got our butylphthalate gauge, which is where we regulate the amount of atmosphere in our unit, or when we can also regulate our filling pressure through the use of this gauge behind it. We've got our gas, our argon, which in this case we have a canister. Back and back, it's below the table, so you can't really see it, but you can see the gauge there. Then we've got our neon flask over here. Beside that neon flask, you'll see we have a vacuum gauge. It's this gauge that helps us to determine when we're ready to fill and whether or not we've got leaks in our system, or if we're still getting a good vacuum, or whether we need to do something a little different. Those are the basic components of our manifold and our bombarding system. We covered that kind of quick, but we don't want to get too in-depth here. We'll be more than happy to break it down in some literature we can send you if you need to. But for now, we're going to go ahead and hook up our DACO neon sign to the system. And in order to do that, we have to determine what gas we're going to use. We have our choice of two gases. We have neon and we have argon. We've decided we wanted to make this blue from the very beginning, so we're going to use the argon gas, which will give us our blue tones. Before we can do that, we will need to talk just a moment here about mercury. When we use an argon gas, we have to use a mercury solid with that. So what I've done is created just a little piece of tubulation here, or a mercury trap, which is nothing more than tubulation with a bubble blown in the middle of it here, and that mercury will sit down inside that bubble until we're ready to stick it into our unit. The mercury acts as kind of an exciter, if you will, to the gas, and it gives us a brighter glow of the gas rather than just the gas by itself. So I'm going to take this particular syringe. I've got some mercury in it already, and I'm going to set that aside for the moment. I'm going to weld my mercury trap onto my unit using my hand torch. I'll inject a little bit of mercury, then I'll weld it onto my system. I'm going to go ahead and weld on this mercury trap to our tubulated end of our unit. To do this, I'll stick my blowhose on one end of the mercury trap. I'm going to place my sandbag that we showed you at the beginning of the video onto the glass. That's going to keep it from sliding around while I'm working on it. Then I'm going to take my hand torch. I'm going to do just a regular weld. I'm going to heat up the ends of the glass just like we've done with our other glass, and weld it into place. Heat up both ends nice and hot because I don't want to leak here. There we go. Now I'll blow it out just a little bit, make sure I don't have a leak, and I can take my blowhose off. Now what I need to do is take my syringe, inject a little bit of mercury into that mercury trap, and we don't need a whole lot. That's plenty. I'll be sure and cover my mercury up, set that aside. Mercury will contaminate real easily and very quickly, so if we leave it open to the atmosphere, we stand at risk of contaminating our bottle. Now at this point, I want to go ahead and connect my unit to my system. So in order to do that, I've got to attach my blowhose to the system through our open air valve right down here. Get out of the way. Then I'll grab my hand torch. I'm going to open up my system to the air. Okay. And once again, I'll just make another weld. nice and hot. Blow it out. Feels pretty solid. I'm blowing down it. I'm getting some resistance, so I don't think I have a leak. And that's really all there is to that. Now we've got our system hooked up. So the next thing we want to do at this point is hook up our two leads. I'm going to take one lead here, hook it up to my electrode. Then I'll take my other lead, hook this up to my electrode. I'm also at this time going to hook up my temperature gauge. I can hook that up anywhere in the line, and what that does is that tells me how warm the glass is getting relative to the electrodes. I want them both to heat up at the same time and the same rate. If I get my glass too hot and my electrodes aren't hot enough, then I'm going to have a problem with processing. I'm going to end up with spots. At this particular point in time, I'm going to take a little piece of mica. This is a potassium aluminum silicate. It's a thin sheet product, and this will keep the glass from burning into itself, melting into itself, so to speak, because we're going to get this glass pretty doggone hot. And any place I've got a couple places here in the sign where the glass gets pretty close to itself. So I'll just stick a couple pieces in there, a piece back in here, and a piece down in here. Like I say, I generally use about 1/8 of an inch as a rule. But it's better safe than sorry. If you think you're too close and you might heat up, go ahead and stick some in there. And what that does is that keeps the two pieces of glass from melting into each other. Now that everything's all set up, I'm going to go ahead and start the processing procedure. What this is all about is I'm going to pull a vacuum into the system, heat up my unit several times, getting hotter each time until my electrodes are a cherry red and my glass is very, very hot. I do this because at that point, any contaminant that might be existing within my system is going to be released into suspension. I'll open up my main stopcock, the vacuum's going to suck it all out. We'll get all of the impurities out of our glass so we don't have any spotting or discoloration or darkening. And then once we have a good vacuum down below 2 on this particular system, we should be able to fill it with gas with confidence. We don't have to worry about spotting or anything along this line. So what I'm going to do is start by opening my main stopcock. I'm going to shut my open air valve that I had open. I open my main stopcock, and you can hear a change in a gurgle in the background noise. That's the vacuum pump starting to pull down. I'm just going to wait for a few moments. Let that initially suck down, about 45 to 60 seconds. And then once I feel that I've got enough of vacuum in there that I can get it to light up, I'll do just that. I'm just going to kind of it's been a few seconds here, so I'm going to just kind of tap on the power. And I haven't got quite enough vacuum in the system at this point. So I'm going to let it suck down for a few more moments. And once I get enough vacuum in there and I hit the power, it's going to light up. Let's try it again. There we go. It lit up, so I'm going to shut my main stopcock. Then I'll come back to my power. And I'm going to run it at about 200 milliamps, which we can see on our amp gauge, up to 100 degrees. So I'm just going to sit on the switch. You can see my milliamp gauge reads about 200 milliamps. And my temperature gauge, I'm going to take that up to about 100 degrees. And what I'm doing is kind of preheating the glass. I want to remove any of the moisture that might be in there or may have been injected in there during the bending stage, because as we blow in our blows, we have a tendency to blow moisture. Okay, there's 100 degrees. So now I'll come out back to my main stopcock. I'm going to open it wide up. And I'm going to wait about 45 to 60 seconds again. Let that suck down. It's going to pull out all of that I've just heated up. Every time I heat that up, I release more and more impurities, moisture, and so forth. I'll release that from the system. It's going to suck on down through my vacuum. So we'll wait about a few more moments. And then the next thing I'll do will be to shut my main stopcock. I think we've had enough time there, so I'll go ahead and shut my main stopcock. Then I'm going to go up to my butylphthalate gauge. I'm going to shut this. That way I can get the gauge to register. And I'm going to inject about 3 millimeters of atmosphere. This scale's kind of hard to see on the video, so I'll just kind of point to it when I get it up there. And what I'm doing is just injecting. I've got a good vacuum in there, but I'm just going to take it nice and slow. Take it up to about 3 and stop. That gives me just a little bit of air in there to work with. If I get too good a vacuum in there, it won't be able to light it up. Now I'm going to come back, hit the switch again. I'm going to go up to about 150 degrees at 200 milliamps. And I'm monitoring my gauges, just kind of watching them. And by the way, this is 150 degrees centigrade. I probably should have said that earlier. But we're going to take this up to about 150 degrees centigrade, which we're about there. And that looks pretty good right there. So then I'm going to come back and I'm going to look at my gauge, and I've increased my pressure there a little bit, so I'm going to pull it back down to 3. I do this by opening my main stopcock, opening slowly, sucking it back down to 3. That's good. Then I'm going to come back here, and this time I'm going to use my choke. I'm going to increase the power. When I increase the power, that's going to increase the heat. I'm going to take this up to 200 degrees at 300 milliamps. So I pull the choke out, and you can see my milliamp gauge. I'm at 300 milliamps. When I look over my temperature gauge, I'll take it up to about 200 degrees centigrade. You can see it gets up there pretty quick. There we go, I'm at 200. So I'll come back here, and once again, I've got some increasing pressure inside my tube. So I'll suck it out. Only this time, I'm going to suck it down to about 2. We'll suck out a little more than we did last time. So I'll go down to 2. There we go. Now I'm going to get back on my gauge. This time I'll go up to 425 milliamps. I'm increasing the electricity each time. I'm also increasing the temperature. So I'll take this all the way up to 425. At this point, you should notice that your electrodes start to get a dull red. I'm going to take my temperature up to approximately 225 to 250. There we go. And you can see my electrodes are a dull red. So I'm going to come back here one last time. I'm going to decrease my pressure this time down to 0.5 or 1/2 millimeters of atmosphere. And I'll shut my main stopcock again. This time I'm just going to get on it with the maximum allowable amperage as rated by our electrode manufacturer until my electrodes are cherry red all the way from top to bottom. I'm going to take this up to about 500 milliamps. And I'm just going to sit on it until the electrodes get cherry red all the way from top to bottom. What I'm doing is burning off any emulsion that might be on the electrode, any contaminants that might have got on there during shipping. I want to make sure this is just as clean as possible. And those are pretty cherry red. So I'm going to lay off the power. I'm going to come back over here, open up my main stopcock. At this point, everything that I've released thus far is going to suck down out of my system. Now I need to know what kind of vacuum I'm getting, so I'm going to open my vacuum gauge stopcock and turn on my vacuum gauge. Just kind of sit back and wait. In a few moments here, you'll see that vacuum gauge start to move. There it goes. If we've done everything right, we have no leaks in the system. With this particular system, the diffusion pump and the size of vacuum pump we have on there, the mechanical pump, we should, without any problem, get down below 2 microns. Now this is 10 millimeter glass, so at this point in time I want to think to myself, how much gas do I want to fill in there? Up to what height on the column? Since it's 10 millimeter glass, I'm going to fill this up to about 13 on the gauge. As a general rule of thumb, you can go by charts, or you can just take, a lot of people, the old timers are taught, take 24 minus the size of your glass, and that'll give you your filling pressure. Either way, you're going to find that it's pretty accurate. So we're going to go ahead and let this suck down for a few more moments. As you can see, it doesn't take real long to process the glass. We're going to fill this up, like I say, with argon gas, and then we'll remove the unit as well as the mercury trap from our system. And set it over on the aging table, let it age up. One last thing I want to do before I fill it with gas while it's still doing the final vacuum, I want to take my little hand torch here and just gently kind of move it along the tubulation in a few spots. All I'm really doing is just heating it up so that any moisture that might be in there has been removed. Now at this point in time, if you look at our vacuum gauge, we're down to 1.5 vacuum gauge, and our temperature is down to about 150 degrees centigrade. You can see we're still dropping on the vacuum. It looks like we're going to get a good vacuum here. We should get down to about 1. Now you've got the camera's showing you a little different angle than a straightaway, which I'm looking at. We'll get it down to about 1, and then we'll go ahead and fill it with gas. Once again, I've decided it's 10 mil glass, so I'm going to take 10 from 24, end up with 14, and that's going to be my filling pressure. And we'll determine that using this gauge here. All right, we've got a good vacuum. Our temperature's good. At this particular point, I want to go ahead and fill it. So I'll shut my vacuum gauge stopcock, turn off my vacuum gauge, make sure everything's closed, and I'm ready to fill with my argon gas. As we mentioned before, we've got 10 mil glass. So we're going to take 24 minus 10, give us 14. And we'll just slowly open this gas line and run the column up to 14. What I'm looking for is to get a rise out of this all the way up on my scale. There we go. Starting to rise. Okay, there's 14. So I close my gasket, hit the power, and there it is, nice and blue. Now it's kind of a dull blue. When I roll that mercury in there, it's going to brighten it up. At this point in time, I'm going to remove my pieces of mica that I put in there. I'm going to put those away. I'm going to take my leads off of the unit, and I'm going to take my temperature gauge sensor off. Then I'll grab my hand torch, and I'm going to melt the glass between the tubulation and the manifold. I want to leave that tubulation on there with my mercury trap. So I'm just going to come in here, melt that. Once it gets nice and warm, I'll pull my unit away from the weld. And because it's under vacuum, it'll seal itself. There we go. Kind of anneal that some. I'll put my hand torch back. Now, I want to wait till this is cool. We filled it at approximately 100 degrees. So if we wait till that cools down some, then we'll take our ball of mercury in our trap here, pick up our unit, and I'm going to roll my mercury down into my unit. I'm just going to turn it up, roll it down in there, and roll it all the way through my unit. What I'm doing is leaving a little tiny trail of mercury throughout the whole unit, and in doing so, that will give us a more intense glow once we apply the electricity. Okay, I've got that mercury rolled all the way through there, so I certainly don't need this. So I'm going to come back with my hand torch, heat it up right here, and pull this off. So I'll set her back down on my table. I'm going to take my sandbag and place it over there to keep it from running around on me. I'm just going to come in here and heat this up. About a 1/4 of an inch away, maybe 3/8. We want to leave a little bit of tubulation on there. Heat it up. You can see it heats up pretty quickly, and then I'll pull my old tubulation away. Once I've got that removed, I'll just kind of roll that up into a little ball. Just kind of push it in, make it a little thicker. And there we have it. We're all done. At this time, I would take my sign, go over to my aging table, hook it up to a transformer and let it burn in for a while, make sure everything's going to work out okay. Once I know it's going to burn in properly, I'll take and black out the background, and it's ready to go. So why don't I go ahead and do that, and we'll be right back. We're over here at the aging table now. You can probably see I've got two leads. I've got a transformer mounted underneath my table. I use this transformer in my shop. It's just a conventional transformer, but it's a 60 milliamp, so it gets a little warmer and reducing my age-in time. The age-in time is the time that you'll see when it comes up to full brightness. It shouldn't take long if you've done your work correctly over there at the processing table. I've also gone so far as to black out the background, and I'll turn this off in just a moment, kind of give you a better look at what we've done with blackout paint. But you can see by looking at the sign, we've got a nice bright sign, our letters are all clean and crisp, reads real well, and the color's good. So why don't I go ahead and turn this off, give you a look at the back of it, kind of help illustrate what we've done with blackout paint, and to kind of dress it up, and then we'll go back into the office and wrap things up. I'll take these leads off. I'm going to be sure and unplug that transformer. All right, we'll give you a zap. If you look at the back of this, I've blacked out my electrodes and all those connections that we made. That's why I tried to stress upon the benefit of welding behind there, because you can hide your welds. And if you turn it around, you can see it shows up real nice. Well, let's go on back into the office and wrap things up.
Welcome back. We hope you've enjoyed our video thus far. We've covered a lot of ground in the last hour and a half, and I'm sure you have questions that are probably left unanswered. You're more than welcome to give us a call here at DACO Neon, and we'll do our best to answer your questions individually. But what we would also like to recommend at this time are a couple of books by Randall Kaba. They're Neon Principle workbooks. You have the reading, which explains it in detail, and then you also have a workbook that goes along with it, with practical exercises that you can practice at home in your shop to help you become a bit more proficient. One thing I would like to say at this time is that it takes quite a bit of time to become a craftsman in the field of neon. But if you're willing to put in the time, you have the patience, we're confident that we're laying a good foundation for that work. At this particular time, I want to thank you for allowing us into your home, and we hope that we've been helpful to you. If you have any questions regarding neon manufacturing, training, equipment, or supplies, feel free to call upon us here at DACO Neon or visit us on our website. You'll find the numbers at the end of the video. But having said that, we'd like to wish you good luck and happy bending. Thank you.